Hi, Gen Bio. Dr. Fry here to talk to you about the spinal cord, muscles, reflexes, and muscle fatigue today. So first, we're going to take a look at a picture of the spinal cord. Okay, so this is a cut through the spinal cord. This is obviously like up and down your back. The dorsal side of the spinal cord is this side. So that's like most towards your back. The ventral side is this side, most towards your chest. Okay. I'll mention that the dorsal side has all of the sensory input going into it. So everything coming in from your peripheral nerves is coming in the dorsal side. Okay. So entering in the back. And then the ventral side has all of the motor information going out. Okay. All the signals telling your muscles what to do. That's coming out the ventral side. Okay. And they're joined together into a mixed sensory and motor spinal nerve. Okay. So on the outside, you've got the meninges, just like we had covering the brain. These are protective layers that are covering both the brain and the spinal cord. There are three different ones, three different layers of meninges. The dura mater, which we saw on top of the brain last week, is also covering the outside of the spinal cord. It's very tough compared to the others. It's a thicker membrane. And then the arachnoid has all the vasculature, okay, lots of vasculature. And then the pia mater is much softer. It's a much thinner membrane covering both the spinal cord and the brain. Okay. And then if you were to cut the spinal cord in half and look at the cut surface, this here is what you would see. Okay. The inside, you might remember from last semester, has sort of a butterfly shape. There's like an enlargement on one side and sometimes more and sometimes less of an enlargement on the dorsal side. So this is the gray matter. The gray matter is inside the white matter for the spinal cord. So white matter on the outside, gray matter on the inside. Okay. And then all of the gray matter is where you will find your neuron cell bodies. Okay, so a lot of motor neurons, you'll remember we looked for on slides last semester. We looked in the gray matter to find the cell bodies there. And then the white matter is made up of the cut ends of the axons. So if you are looking for different fibers basically coming out, that's myelinated white matter from the extensions of the neurons. Okay. And then in the middle, you've got the central canal. As I said, the dorsal side is where you're going to have the incoming sensory information. And then the ventral side is where you're going to have outgoing motor information. And then there are a total of 31 mixed sensory and motor mixed spinal nerves that exit between your vertebrae. Okay. All right. So one of the major things that the spinal cord is actually able to mediate on its own without using the brain are reflexes. So reflexes don't have to actually enter your brain. They can be mediated just through actions of the nerves in the spinal cord. So there are 5 major components to a reflex arc, okay? And those are, the first one is a stimulus. You need to have something that initiates the reflexive response, okay? So that's going to be activating a receptor on a sensory neuron. So you've got some kind of stimulus. We're gonna look at the next slide in just a minute where we look at a very classic well-known reflex. When you go to the doctor, he'll often hit your knee with a hammer, right? And you usually have a kick out response. So the stimulus is going to be the impact, the hit of the hammer that stretches then, in this example, the quadriceps muscle. So that's a stimulus that is sensed by receptors on sensory neurons. And this is our second component of the reflex arc. Okay, so the sensory neuron carries that message about the stimulus into, this is our spinal cord, okay, into the spinal cord. So this here is our receptor on the sensory neuron, receives that stimulus, Second step is to send a signal into the spinal cord, okay? And this is called the afferent pathway. So the afferent pathway is heading towards the central nervous system, okay? The signal going towards the central nervous system. And then there's an integration center. That's step number 3 in our reflex, okay? The integration center is going to be in the spinal cord, and it can be comprised of one synapse between two different neurons, just a sensory and a motor, or multiple synapses. So a synapse is the space that is between two different neurons. So incoming signal from one neuron, little space where it junctions with another neuron and sends a signal to the receiving neuron. Okay, so one synapse can mediate the response, or it can be polysynaptic, meaning that there's more than one synapse. So the one we're looking at here is polysynaptic because you can see the sensory neuron synapses on an interneuron, this little guy, and then the interneuron synapses on the motor neuron here, okay? So it can be either one. On the next slide, we're gonna see another example of a monosynaptic integration. All right, and then the fourth step in our reflex arc is the efferent pathway. So this is taking a signal away from the central nervous system. And that's gonna be done through a signal of a motor neuron. Okay, so this fiber here is a motor neuron. It's gonna convey an impulse to then an effector, which is the 5th step in our reflex, okay? The mediation of a response by an effector. It's usually a muscle or gland. And for a reflex, for the one we're going to look at with the knee-jerk reflex, the effector is going to be a muscle. And we actually have 2 for this particular reflex, the quadriceps and the hamstring, okay? So those are the 5 parts of a reflex. Let's look at our picture on the next slide, okay? So again, the first step of the reflex is stimulus. Go to the doctor, hit your knee with a hammer. That is sensed, that stretch is in the quadriceps is sensed by a neuron that is going, it's indicated in blue here, that is going to take that impulse to the central nervous system. Okay, so there's receptors on the sensory neuron, sense that stretch, and then you've got your afferent signal, okay, your afferent pathway. Sensory neuron takes that impulse through the dorsal side of the spinal cord. Again, here's your dorsal side, okay, and here's your ventral side. Dorsal side again is taking in sensory input, and the motor output is traveling through the ventral side. Okay. All right, so step number 2, sensory neuron takes that information along the neuron and then enters the integration center, where you've got 2 different branches to this sensory neuron. One branch has a monosynaptic integration, and the other branch of the sensory neuron here has a polysynaptic integration, okay? Step number 3, we've got integration in the spinal cord. The polysynaptic integration branch, it has an interneuron, whereas the monosynaptic, it's just sensory and motor neurons, and that's it, okay? All right, so step number 4 then, in both cases, you're gonna have motor neurons conveying signals to the effector, okay? And so for this first one here, we have a motor neuron that sends a signal to the quadricep muscle, and that causes contraction of the quad, which will allow your lower leg to be extended, okay? So it'll like kick out. And then the second motor neuron is inhibiting contraction of your hamstring. So it's going to remain relaxed, and that also facilitates then that extension of your lower leg, that kick response, okay? All right, so that is a reflex. Not all motor signals obviously are reflexive. Some are mediated by your brain when you choose to conduct an action, okay? And we're going to take a look now at different types of muscle movements. Okay, so a lot of times you've got antagonistic muscles that kind of work together to move limbs in one direction or the other. And the first example of this we're going to look at is flexion and extension. These are opposite movements. Okay, so for the picture shown here, you're bringing two arms of a joint. Say this is an angle, right? This is a joint. You've got like the two parts of your arm, two limbs or two axes of the joint, bringing them either closer to one another, that's called flexion, or further from one another. So bringing those two parts of your arm closer to one another is flexion, further away is extension, okay? And then another movement that muscles can mediate is abduction and its counterpart, adduction, okay? And that's shown here in the picture, where abduction is moving limbs or structures away from the center of the body, such as shown in the picture. You've got your arms moving away from the center of the body. You can also do that with your legs, or towards the center of the body. So one of my students many years ago told me that they remember it because if you are conducting an adduction movement, you're adding to the body, and the reverse would be abduction, moving it further away from the body, okay, center of the body. And then of course there's rotation. You can shake your head no, you can move your legs, also in rotation. So if you were grinding something into the ground with your toe, you're standing and grinding it into the ground, that's a rotation of your thigh. Okay, so rotate the head, internal, which is towards the center of the body, external, away from the center of the body. Okay. All right, so let's look at some specific muscles which are responsible for these actions next. So rotation of the head is mediated by the sternocleidomastoid, which is shown here in orange. So this muscle here allows us to shake our head no. The deltoid, which is here in the picture, is responsible for abduction of the upper arm, and then its counterpart, the pecs, are responsible for adduction of the upper arm. So bringing them further, abduction, or closer to the body. And then your biceps and your triceps are antagonistic muscles to one another also. So the biceps is responsible for flexion, so bringing the two arms, the two axes of this angle, close to one another or further from one another. Towards one another is flexion, that's mediated by your biceps. Away from one another's extension, mediated by your triceps, okay? All right, and then similar movements can be made by our lower body muscles, okay? So like I had said, if you were rotating your thigh, if you're grinding something into the ground with your toe, I don't know why you would do that, but just in case, that would be mediated by your sartorius, and the movement is a rotation of the thigh, okay? Grinding something with your toe. And then you can have extension or flexion of your thigh, and these were the muscles that were responsible for the knee-jerk reflex as well. The quadriceps is responsible for extension of your thigh, and the hamstring is responsible for flexion of the thigh. So again, extension is going to be drawing the two parts of your leg further, extension from one another, or closer, flexion to one another. Okay. All right, and then adduction and abduction of your lower leg are mediated by the gluteus maximus and the adductor magnus, respectively. So abduction, again, is taking that lower leg or your leg further from your body, and that's mediated by the gluteus maximus. Closer to your body, bring it back in, is mediated by the adductor magnus. Okay. All right. And then a few other points here about how muscles work. So mental and muscular activities in other areas of the body can actually act to increase the magnitude of your reflexes. So if you are already kind of stimulated, you are either actively moving, you've been working out, or you're moving, or you're mentally excited, you're undergoing mental activities, you're already kind of in a active mode. This can actually increase, it's been shown to actually increase the magnitude of reflexes. And the reverse would happen though if you were fatigued. So if you work them too hard, if you're to the point where you're really exhausting those muscles in your body, then fatigue can diminish a reflexive response. You have probably heard by now that muscles, they use ATP. This is the energy form that our body uses to conduct work. And when they're used for long periods of time, they can switch from aerobic to anaerobic respiration. So aerobic respiration is when the body uses oxygen as the final electron acceptor. Obviously, you're generating ATP, you're making energy, but the final electron acceptor in the electron transport chain is oxygen. And that's a very efficient method of generating ATP. Now, if you've fatigued yourself too much, you've been working your muscles for long periods of time, then you might switch from aerobic to anaerobic respiration, which is much less efficient. And it doesn't use oxygen, it uses something else as the final electron acceptor. And this can result in accumulation of waste products such as lactic acid. And that's why you feel like a muscle burn if you've been working it for too long. All right, so during the course of the lab this week, we're going to have you do some exercises on muscle movement and explore muscle fatigue. Okay. We're also going to look at the spinal cord. We're going to have a sheep spinal cord that you can look at just to see the gray matter and white matter and meninges covering it. Very basic. You're not going to have to dissect it in any way. Just look at the external anatomy and the cut surface. And then, like I said, we're doing a few exercises exploring muscle fatigue. And then I want to conduct a review. I'll do a short review since I think our time in lab this week will be not too long. We won't have too many activities that take up too much time in lab. We'll do a little review of the first 3 labs, which will be on our first practical, which is going to be March 5th. Okay, so that is going to be a paper practical, same as I believe we did for the first couple last semester, all on paper. And so I want to just go over some of that. We'll do like a couple little practice questions in lab to take advantage of our time together. And then I also want to mention that your first writing assignment, you've had a couple assignments so far, but this semester, instead of quizzes, we're really going to focus on writing assignments. So your first one is going to be due March 9th, which is the next time we will meet in lab after this week. So that will be the introduction is one component of science writing. Okay, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of science writing. It involves an abstract, which is a very short summary of what your experiment entails. So if you were conducting an experiment and you wanted to share that with the scientific community, you could do that either through a presentation at like a conference, or you could write it up, which most often is done, write it up in a paper, so a journal article. And like I said, that always starts, the format for journal articles always starts with an abstract, which is a short overview, usually a paragraph or 2, of what you did and the background for the rest of the paper. The introduction then, which is the first one we're going to have you write, that's your first writing assignment. It provides background information for the experiment. It cites other work that has been done in that field. So you're going to be writing your introduction on muscle fatigue. So if you were a researcher intending to publish your experiment, your hypothetical experiment, on muscle fatigue, you would have already had to go back through journal articles, read works that have been done in the past, know where the field stands at this point so that you can contribute some value to the field. Okay, so you want to do an experiment that hasn't been done already, you want to contribute, make progress in the field. So the introduction is basically drawing other sources. You're taking other research that's been done and kind of setting the stage with that for how you're going to progress the field with your study. Okay. So you look at other background research done, you bring those in, you cite those, and then that sets the stage for what you want to, what you're going to present, what your experiment is, and how that's going to progress the field. Okay. And you obviously want to end the introduction with what you want to do and what your hypothesis is. So starts with a general description of the topic, cites other research done already, and then brings it home to what your project is and what you want to find, what your hypothesis, what you expect to find. Okay. So that's the introduction. That's the one we're doing right now. Throughout the course of the semester, we're going to do the other parts. We're going to do the materials and methods, the results, and the discussion section as well. And then at the end of the semester, we put it all together, all 5 components, abstract, introduction, materials, methods, results, and discussion, into one big article. Now, for the smaller assignments, for the smaller writing assignments, we're focusing on different topics. So the introduction is going to be on muscle fatigue. Materials and methods is going to be on a different topic based on what we do in lab. Okay. Results is going to be on a third different topic. So they won't, as we do these smaller writing assignments, they won't all be on the same topic. However, when we have you write the full paper at the end of the semester, that will be on one topic. So it'll be cohesive, all of these sections that describe one topic that would be similar to what you would publish if you were writing a science journal article. Okay. All right. So again, we're going to do introduction first, background info, cite primary sources. So primary source, we had an assignment on this last week. Primary data source is research that has been done and is published. So you want to go on your library's website and look for a database. I can help you find it if you don't know where that is, but go on your library's website. I think it's click on articles and databases. And then you want to select a database that has to do with science. Biology and chemistry is one of the categories. You can click on biology and chemistry and then find a specific database like PubMed or JSTOR, Access Science, stuff like that. So use that database then and hunt for, you can search for then articles that are already written that have something to do with your topic, which is muscle fatigue. Okay. So you want to really go look for other articles and use those, cite those in your introduction. Okay. And then again, as we go through the semester, as we move through the semester, we're going to have you write smaller writing assignments on materials and methods, which is going to describe the methods, how you did an experiment, what materials you used, the process that you went through so that another person could replicate your experiment just by reading your materials and methods section. Okay. And then the results, obviously you're going to tell what you found. And it often includes pictures, graphs, tables, depends on what your topic is, but you definitely will have some visual aids that present the data, okay, that you find. And then the last section is the discussion. This will describe how you think your findings impact the larger field of science. So the field that you want to contribute to, you want to bring your results into the larger picture. Say, okay, this is what I found, and I think it supports this concept, or I believe that it indicates that a certain mechanism of action is taking place, whatever. Okay. The last thing I want to mention is that science writing is very clear and concise. You want to be thorough, but each sentence should have a clear meaning. And we don't use a lot of flowery words. Okay. So you don't need to describe minute details unless they impact the process. Okay. So write clearly, concisely, and keep to the point. Like often, I think in English paper, writing for literature class, you might have a word count, right? You might have, well, it has to be 1,500 words. We don't have that because we don't want you to meet a certain number of words. We want you to meet the whatever word count best, most simply describes what you found or what your topic is. Okay, so don't try to make it longer than it has to be just to meet a word count, is what I'm saying. Keep it simple. Okay. All right, I think that is it for this video. I will see you guys in lab next week, and any questions you can always email at cfry.edu or at lvc.edu. cfry@lvc.edu. All right, have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.